Hi, welcome to Myers ASMR. I'm so happy to see you. Thanks for stopping by. I was in New York earlier today and I went to the Strand bookstore and I'm super duper happy that they're still around, that they're still there. I used to hang out there like probably about 20 years ago or more, and it was bustling then and it was bustling today. So I needed to get some new reading material for my channel, and I picked up this one. Yay! The new Male Sexuality. I'm excited to jump into that, but first, I do need a taste of some dessert. It may not look like much, but the taste is wow. Probably left it in the oven a little bit too long. It's sweet potato pie. Ooh, it smells so good. Nice and spicy. Cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Yeah. That is good stuff. Oops. Well, okay. Let's not delay any longer. The New Male Sexuality, The Truth About Men, Sex, and Pleasure. This book is written by Bernie Zilbergeld, Ph.D. All right. Okay, this is an old book, but I don't know how much things have changed. We'll see when we get into it. Let's start with the introduction. The new male sexuality? What in heaven's name could be new about sex, especially for men? Everyone knows that men are the essence of simplicity. They have only one sexual organ, which is hanging right out there in public view. Nothing mysterious or complex about that. And it's clear what men want and what their main problem is: getting as much sex as they can. I never subscribed to that bit of fantasy, but when I wrote Male Sexuality in the mid-1970s, I thought that I had explored the topic. Sure, I might someday do an update covering medical and therapeutic advances in the treatment of male sex problems, but a whole book within 15 years on the new male sexuality? The idea didn't occur to me, and if it had, I would have dismissed it as silly. But reality intervened. Even before Male Sexuality was published in 1978, I was hearing about new issues from my clients. One of the most astonishing was that in a number of couples, the woman was complaining that the man was far less interested in sex than she was. Who had ever heard of such a thing? Another surprise was the number of men who were having sex but not enjoying it. There was also increasing anger from women about men's unwillingness to relate the way the women wanted them to. and increased resentment and despair among men about what they perceived as women's insatiable demands for personal sharing. The world, as usual, was changing. It is these changes in sex, men, relationships, therapy, and in society at large that resulted in this book. Here, in somewhat overlapping categories, is some of what is new in our world and in this book. Sex. When I'm being honest with myself, I have to admit there's a lot about sex I don't know. It's not only not knowing more about women and what makes sex good for them. There's a lot about my own sexuality I haven't explored. I'm in my 30s, but I think my sexual knowledge is at the 15-year-old level. Man 34. My friends and I pretend we know a lot, but we don't. We just feed off each other's ignorance. We can't even talk honestly about sex. I think we're all good at getting ourselves off, but I doubt that any of us is a good lover. Man 21. I guess I'm lucky. I've never had a problem functioning or getting as much sex as I wanted, but I often wonder if this is all there is. I mean, sex is usually pleasant, sometimes very good, but it's never the kind of stuff you read about in books or see in movies. Am I missing something, or is that stuff just media hype? Man 39. Can you imagine a conversation between your grandparents or parents on an early date in which one asked the other if he or she had been tested for a certain sexually transmitted disease? Or where they discuss how many sexual partners they had had and what kinds of things they had done with them? Or when they finally got into bed, which might not have been until they were married, one asked the other how she liked to be stimulated or which intercourse position he preferred. Such discussions simply didn't take place in the past. We view sex differently than our ancestors and even our parents did. While we agree with them that sex is powerful, potentially dangerous, and potentially wonderful, we differ from them in our sense of entitlement about sex. Most Americans now see sexual activity and pleasure as their natural birthrights, something we are free to do or not do when, how, as often as, and with whom we please. While we aren't in favor of people having sex in the streets or in front of children, we see no reason to keep it hidden behind closed doors. We want sex more out in the open than in the past. We want information about it to be readily available. And we most certainly don't want parents, government, or religious institutions to dictate our sex lives. We are also aware of risks. While sexually transmitted diseases are as old as sex itself, we are the first generation in history to be confronted with the most deadly of these diseases. The specter of AIDS looms in the background, no matter what we say, and even if our behavior doesn't change much, there's always a moment of hesitation, a sense that one may be risking one's life. AIDS has somewhat dampened the unabashed enthusiasm for sex so many of us experienced in the 1960s and 70s. Our sense of entitlement to sexual pleasure and the fear of AIDS are not the only things that are changing sex. For the first time in history, women are now seen as equal partners, being as fully sexual as men, having the right to initiate as well as refuse, being able to orchestrate the process and suggest new ideas, being equally entitled to sexual satisfaction. The idea of sex as something a man took from a woman with the only goal being his satisfaction is as dead as the dodo bird in the majority of American male hearts. We want to make our partners happy in bed. For some men, equal participation in sex has been liberating. For others, unfortunately, it has only contributed to the pressure to perform that men have always felt. There's also a nagging sense that the sex we know and have isn't as good as it could be. One reason involves gender-related differences. Men and women are not the same sexually, just as they are not the same in other areas. But many of us realize that we don't understand the differences and what to do about them. Even aside from gender differences, there's a sense that something is not quite right with the models of sex dominant in our culture. There's too much emphasis on performance, too many unspoken roles, too much tension, too little time, and ability to really get into it and be oneself and to explore new possibilities. Added to this is a feeling that the sex we know is too greatly focused on young people with new partners and new relationships, and not enough on how to make and keep sex enjoyable as we and our relationships age. The traditional model of sex most of us were trained in focuses on male performance. The man has to make the right moves, has to get and keep an erection for as long as necessary, however long that might be. And now that women are entitled to sexual satisfaction, also has to provide an ecstatic experience for his partner. Just how he's supposed to know what moves to make, how he's supposed to control an organ that often seems to have a mind of its own, and how he's supposed to know what his partner needs and wants are questions for which there are no clear answers. This model puts enormous pressure on the man to perform and leads to unnecessary anxiety and fakery of all sorts. Pretending to be interested when he isn't, pretending to have knowledge he doesn't, and even pretending to have orgasms. Women aren't the only ones who do this. For men, the traditional model of sex amounts to playing against a stacked deck. Maybe we need to start stacking the deck on our side. Throughout the book, I offer the elements of a new model of sex, one that emphasizes pleasure, closeness, and self and partner enhancement rather than performance and scoring. This model broadens the acts we usually think of as sexual and also how we go about them. Good sex doesn't have to be the traditional foreplay intercourse routine. There are whole menus of choices that can give pleasure and fit the relationship and situation precisely. We need to know what the choices are and be willing to be flexible. This model has a lot to offer both men and women because it allows us to more closely integrate sex with the rest of our lives and values, to be free of unnecessary performance pressures and anxiety, to be more honest with ourselves and each other, and to feel better about what we're doing. This new model is based on a growing awareness among both men and women that good sex is not something that just happens. Although reproduction may be natural, reproductive sex is not necessarily good sex. Conception can occur with rape or incest with sex that lasts only 3 seconds and doesn't feel particularly good for either partner. Although there are still many people who think sex is or should be natural with no need to think or learn or talk. This idea has been increasingly discredited. Good sex is no more doing what comes naturally than is an adult conversation. Whether we're talking about your behavior in the bedroom or boardroom, the athletic field, the concert hall stage, or most other places, an incredible amount of learning and effort has gone into it. Acting naturally in any of these places would be totally out of place, except for a 3-year-old. Adult spontaneity comes when you have integrated your learned behaviors, including feelings, attitudes, and thoughts, into a smooth sequence of acts that looks graceful to others and feels automatic or natural to you. Each of us daily does many things that seem totally natural, yet at one time caused us all sorts of difficulties. If you want to improve your skills in intimacy or sex, rest assured that with enough time and practice and the awkwardness and sense of artificiality will disappear and your new skills will feel absolutely natural. A good lover is not someone who's just doing what comes naturally. Rather, he is a man who has learned and practiced a lot, who now feels relatively comfortable with his body, his values, and his skill, and acts in ways that maximize the chances of generating pleasure for himself and his partner. That is what he is, and what you can be as well. Since the new model of sex is based on pleasure rather than performance, there's a new chapter on sexual arousal, the key to good feeling eroticism. And since so much of what inhibits us sexually has to do with what we think is right or normal, there is a new chapter exploring the nature of sexual normality. 2 additional new chapters explore sex among singles and how to keep sex good over the years. There is yet another new chapter on a topic hardly anyone touches upon but is of significant importance to men: how to initiate sex. Men, I think I'll someday look back and say this was an exciting time, but right now it's mainly confusing. Nothing seems clear or defined. It's like everything is up for grabs. There's no standard for being a man or a woman, for how to relate, even for how to have sex. A little more clarity would be appreciated. Man 42. The world is becoming feminized. Women are the ones defining what the rules are in terms of love, sex, and everything else. I'm not even sure what it means to be a man anymore. Man 47. A new consciousness has been stirring among men in the last 10 years, although this is not an exact parallel to the women's movement of 20 years or so ago. There's no doubt that something is afoot. Many men, by themselves or in groups, are starting to question the values they were brought up with. They are asking what those values mean and what prices they exact, and more generally, what it means to be a man, and more personally, what kind of man they want to be. This raises the question of whether there is indeed a new man, a being we've heard a lot about from the media in the last 10 years. The idea is that basically in response to the women's movement, men have changed. They have become more what women want, more sensitive and understanding, more intimate, more involved in childcare and housework. I believe there is some truth in this claim. There have been changes. We know that men are doing more housework than before and more childcare. And more men are taking seriously women's complaints about men not being intimate and sensitive enough. But as always, the media exaggerate. A few years ago, there were so many stories about house husbands, men who took care of home and children while their wives went out to work, that you could easily get the impression that this was a major trend in modern society. Yet the fact is that very few men could be called house husbands by any reasonable definition. I think it's closer to the mark to say not that a new man has arrived, but rather that men today are struggling with a situation far more complicated and confusing than it was for their fathers and grandfathers. That men are subject to new pressures and messages, many of which conflict with the older rules. Yes, a man should still be strong, but this should be balanced by sensitivity and restraint. Too much strength is now paradoxically seen as a defect, a sign of neurosis. The term macho is used today as often in a derogatory sense as in an admiring one. And a man has to be careful about the sensitivity as well. Too much of it, however, much that may be, can get him called wimp and weakling. Yes, a man should still be successful at work, but somehow he should also find time to relate to his partner and participate equally in child rearing and household chores. Exactly where the time and energy will come from to carry out all these tasks is never explained. Yes, a man should still be a forceful lover. After all, women don't want wimps in bed. But in addition, he should be tender and considerate. understanding his partner's desires and rhythms even though she may not speak them, and be willing to do whatever is necessary for her satisfaction. Yes, a man should still take the sexual initiative, and he should persevere even when he encounters slight or possibly feigned resistance. But he now needs to be able to differentiate possibly feigned resistance from a genuine rebuff, and he needs to be careful lest a sexual invitation he makes is construed as sexual harassment. Well, that completes today's story time. This book is very interesting, and I'm looking forward to sharing the rest with you over time. Thanks for listening and watching. Hey, if you like what I'm doing here, feel free to donate to my Cash App, like and subscribe. Catch me in the next video, and may you find lasting happiness. Bye.